But the next storyteller, for me, he's very, very special. Because it's an artist that I've been performing with for a couple of years. And for many years, every time that I went on, he would be next to me or behind me with his instruments. And in this spirit of caring, he would hold the story with his music. And it took us quite a few years to realize that he is a storyteller himself. And then it took him a while to realize it himself. Because it's often the other people who realize it and have to convince him. For him, he's just a very nervous guy. He was about to come for the second time and do something. And the first time was in this tiny, tiny, tiny place. And now he's going to do it in front of all of you guys. But you guys are a very friendly bunch, right? Yes. So the way that he always held us storytellers with his music, you guys will carry him as the audience, right? Yeah? And if you see that he's a little bit nervous, it's only all the more endearing, right? That he's standing here, maybe shaking a little bit, to share his personal stories with you guys, right? Yes?
Okay, I'm coming.
Yeah? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Anastasis!
Good evening. Can you be my water friend? Thank you. You see me collapsing, just give me some water. Summer of 1994 in Athens, where I lived, it gets very warm. Athenians? It gets very warm, I can assure you. And my father thought it would be a good idea to take the family, me, my brother, and my mother, and take us to the village, to his father's village, my grandfather's village, which is in the north of Greece, which is much cooler. It's between the mountains. It's okay for the summer. It's a nice escape. Plus, I would get connected to my roots and spend some time with Grandpa. I would also play in the fields and climb the mountains, and I would enjoy nature. As an Athenian boy, my father thought I needed it. My mom didn't think so. My mom had a completely different perspective on the whole village thing. She warned me about the cats with fleas in their fur that sort of climb on beds and is not suitable environment for a child. There's a chicken, infected chicken in the kitchen running, and there is like rats that roam the roof during the night. It's not that you should. I don't think you should go either. So my mom wasn't coming. My brother was old enough to say no, so he would go on vacation with his friends. And I was sort of signing up with Dad at that point in my life, so I decided to go. And I had a blast. I had an amazing time. I was stuffed with food from my grandmother day and night. I would have all four of the children of the village lining up in front of my doorstep, wanting to spend time with a cool Athenian boy with a Game Boy and the thing. They would take me up. They would show me like the secret path to go up in the mountain and go by the cross and light a fire. And then smoke the first cigarette, maybe, or tell a dirty story, or. And I remember this one afternoon, like the time with the sun sets and this golden light sort of sheds. It was beautiful. And when we were standing underneath this overhead vineyard, you got two types of vineyards, the overhead one, and we were picking grapes with my dad and my grandfather, and there was my grandmother at the doorstep. And she was proudly observing the three generations of men carrying the same name and doing the same thing. She was proud, and I remember my dad and my grandfather being busy with local affairs. They were gossiping on the villagers, as you do. They started at the top of the village, and there was this guy that bought a goat recently, and then there was this other guy whose horse died, and there was this guy who his daughter got married to the son of the guy with a goat, and everything was kind of interconnected in the village, and at some point they ran out of subjects. They reached the next door neighbor. Like they commented, they gossiped about everyone, and they reached the next door neighbor who happened to have a son who was handicapped. So my grandfather says, "Have you heard the guy Kostas, the guy from next door? His son is a cripple." And my dad says, "A cripple? Yeah, cripple." And it's so difficult for that father to have a crippled son, because then he has to bathe him, and he has to change his clothes, and he has to walk around the village carrying the shame of having a crippled son, which is kind of ironic. And then my father says that must be hard for him. And my grandfather says, hard? There's no worse shame, there's no worse curse for a father, for his son to be a cripple or a faggot. And I thought, what is a faggot? 1994, I was 11. Because if a faggot means what I think it means, then this conversation, I think, it relates to me more than I originally thought. So but I hold this thought, and I hold my breath, and I swallow this wimp, and I go to bed. Water fan. And I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm still holding my breath, in fact I'm suffocating, and I look at myself and I'm covered with skin rash, and I'm bloated up, and I'm transferred to the hospital where they put the IV, and they start asking questions. What happened? Did he come in contact with any animals? And my father says, yeah, well, there's cats in the house, but he's not allergic to cats, really. And the doctor says, well, he did have an anaphylactic shock, and there's cats in the house, so maybe he is allergic to cats, actually. And my grandfather says, thank God, I thought the kid was a faggot. No, he didn't say that. But my mother on the phone, she was furious. She was like, I told you so, you should have never been there in the first place, you never listened to me, I knew this was gonna happen, bring him to Athens immediately. So I go to Athens, I'm transferred to Athens, and then, for me, then the story starts. Where are we going next week? We're going to Mr. Fotiou's place. Mr. Fotiou has cats, right? And Anastasis had this allergic reaction, blah, 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 maybe he shouldn't go. Then the week after was, Anastasis, your friend Michael, I remember his mom has 2 cats. Maybe it's not a good idea to go to his house. So basically the next 22 years of my life has been me avoiding cats. And then at some point, becoming allergic, having allergic reactions to cats. And yeah, 22 years passed like that. 22 years of watery red eyes and 22 years of pockets filled with handkerchiefs and plus the shame of not being a cat person. No one likes you if you don't like cats. Yeah, April 2016. Koningsdag, King's Day. My first King's Day in the Netherlands. Very happy, very excited about it. It's all about integreren and assimileren. As soon as I came here, so it's like I'm gonna do whatever Dutch people do on King's Day. I took some drugs and I went out. And I found good friends, and then I sort of ended with one of them. She was a medical student at that point. And we started sharing stories, you know how it is, like, I had this, oh really, tell me about your pet, and then I told her at some point that I'm allergic to cats, and you know, medical students, like, how so? Tell me about your symptoms, and then I start telling her, and she's like, are you sure you're allergic to cats? And then I go, listen, this is the story, this is how it happened. So I tell her the story that I just told you, this whole thing about the grandfather village and the whole thing. And while I'm telling the story, I realized that maybe this has been just a story. So in other words, maybe I have been telling the story so many times to myself, and other people have been telling me, that this story became my reality in a sense. But we were way too high to solve this problem. So we just leave it there, we just leave it at that. Now, that was April 2016. May, June 2016, I'm called in Athens to do a project. I told you, summers in Athens is very hot. So I wake up early in the day and I do my shower and I go outside in the yard and I do my laptop work while it's still fresh, because then the sun comes out and you go in hiding into a cave for the rest of the day. So I'm out there in the morning, and this cute little kitten climbs down a tree. I know, right? And it sits on my lap and he falls asleep. And I am freaking out. I've never touched a cat in 20 years. I'm like, what do I do with this? I don't do it. They like. So I start petting it. And it feels sort of warm and nice. And then I reach for my phone and I don't move, I don't want to wake up. I reach my phone and I take a picture of it and I send it to my friend. Hey, kitten is sitting on my lap. So needless to say, I kept the cat and then I fed it the next day, and then I took it to the vet where we this and we all the things you do to the cat. And then we went on vacation together, and he is the most amazing. We climb rocks together, we go by the sea, and and then, I mean, you can probably tell from the marks on my hands that I took him with me.
No.
To Amsterdam, yes. I brought him with me and we spent the dark days together, and of course he sleeps in my bed, of course. He wakes me up every morning, he rubs like his forehead on my forehead he bumps me. And I know I sound like a faggot, but at least I'm not allergic to cats anymore.
gentlemen, what do you think?